Welcome back to class, everybody. We only have about 2 weeks left of class. We have today and Wednesday. Then we have the Thanksgiving break. And then when we get back from the break, we have our review session on Monday. And then the final exam is available on Wednesday through this coming Sunday. And that's the course. If you have any questions, please let me know. All of the lectures are posted online. Please get in any exam 1 or exam 2 corrections that you need so that I can do my work to improve the grades. And if you have any outstanding assignments or issues or anything like that, please let me know. Today, what we're going to do is start on our discussion of human walking and human gait. But before I do that, I'd like to share my screen and just show you a couple of things. First of all, let's take a look quickly at the syllabus so we know where we are in the semester. We are right here, 11/23. And as of right now, we are right on schedule. So your 4th assignment is due Friday at the end of the week. It says that we will not have class on 11/25 due to Thanksgiving break. I mean, that's what the syllabus says. Maybe we won't have class. I was planning on doing it, but I guess the syllabus says that we're not. So Jasmine, would you like to, are you traveling? Zachary, are you traveling?
No, I'm staying local.
I'm not traveling, no.
If I don't finish the lecture today, then I'll finish up anything that I have on Wednesday. And I don't mind working on Wednesday and finishing up anything that we haven't finished. So let's see how today goes, and maybe we'll meet on Wednesday. So this is pretty much the last couple of days of the semester. If you have any questions, please email me or get in touch with me. You can call me if you need to. I hope everybody has a healthy and a happy Thanksgiving. The next thing that I want to do is very quickly show you a video here. Now the videos don't work great on Zoom, but I think that you'll get the idea. So I'm just going to press play here. I'm sure you guys have all maybe seen this Asimo robot. My question to you is, in this day and age, with all of our computer technology and stuff, why don't we see more robots around? Maybe we can have a quick discussion, but I'll show you just maybe 5 minutes of this.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, Asimo.
Hello, Mark. It's nice to see you.
It's nice to see you too, Asimo. I am happy to be here with you today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here in Washington, D.C.
The all-new Asimo received a full model change, equipped with high response control system and applied mechanisms that are all newly designed. Engineering innovations regarding flexibility and balance control have increased Asimo's agility, both in the upper and lower body. Stability control that was first developed as a key part of making Asimo walk autonomously has seen continuous innovation and has taken another big step forward with this new model. Asimo, are you ready to climb the stairs?
I'm ready.
Okay, go for it. Some of you have likely seen Asimo climb the stairs on its website, but the latest version of the robot can ascend and descend much more smoothly without even having to stop at the base of the stairs. Great job, Asimo. Well done. And of course, it takes even more balance and precision to make it back down, continuously adjusting itself as necessary all the way down. Very impressive, Asimo. Now, we will see more of the lower body improvements in just a few minutes. But first, we would like to demonstrate some vital new technology in Osimo's manual dexterity. To begin with, significant changes have been.
So the question that I have is, in this day and age, why don't we see more robots? And why was it such a big deal for Asimo to climb up and down stairs? And for that matter, does anybody have any comments or any observations of looking at Asimo the robot? Does anybody have any comments or things that they could add in terms of what you noticed? Yes, Jasmine.
He looks like a little like hunchback kind of. He's kind of like bent over, leaning forward.
Okay, any other things that you noticed? I'll just keep it on you because you have the mic. Can you talk about his walking pattern at all?
It was weird.
Okay, it was weird, which means, like, you know, we want to make sure that we get away from potentially thinking about that it was not normal. You know, sometimes as physical therapists, we want to get it so that people walk, I guess, air quotes, more normal or normal looking, but that necessarily shouldn't be the goal, because everybody walks, and the walking patterns that emerge are efficient for everybody, but it didn't look like, you know, real human walking, although it was pretty smooth. But I agree with you, it looked a little bit of an altered gait. Anything else, Jasmine, that you notice?
Not really. I kind of faded out a little bit. I didn't get to look too hard.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to kind of see the videos on Zoom. Now, Jasmine, why don't you think you see more robots, given the fact that we are in such a technological time right now?
Well, I mean, I've heard in the past that like they kind of can be like, you know, dangerous, I guess. I don't know. Like, I remember seeing like a podcast one time where they talked about how like it teaches itself languages that the humans can't always like learn. Like they don't really know where they get it from. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it. Also, like expenses.
I think
Sure.
expenses are something that we want to consider. Now, when you looked at the back of the robot, did you notice what it was wearing?
I didn't know.
All right, let me see if I can show one more time. All right, and let's just see if I pull it up. Let's see if it comes up. All right, so this Asimo robot
Have been made to the technology.
So he's backpack.
What do you think this is, Jasmine?
A backpack, like a battery pack, maybe, or maybe something to keep the weight even.
It's a battery pack. All right, and look at how big that battery pack is, right? I mean, it's a significant amount of that robot's weight. I would say maybe a tenth of the weight is that battery. And the other thing is as it's going up and down stairs, right, they're talking about how it's continuously making adjustments and things like that on the way down the stairs. And for this robot to have gone upstairs, and this is 2018, so this is pretty current, to be able to go up and down stairs was a technological advance that they had been working on and improving. I've never thought about walking up and down stairs, really. It seems to just kind of happen on its own. So the question is why don't we see many robots? All right, and I would say let's just talk about this part here. Let's just talk about that battery. Think about how difficult it's been over the last couple of years to get phones that don't die halfway through the day. Right now you have these iPhones and the phone will last, you know, for a good amount of time, but it's still, the battery, I have 15% right now. So getting a phone, even this size phone, you know, not a big phone, not a robot, but just a regular iPhone 8 to last for a long period of time takes a lot of battery. All right. In order to get a robot to function, would need a huge battery. And that's one of the things that they're working on, trying to condense this battery source smaller and smaller, and also make it so that the battery lasts longer and longer. So there's a couple of things. First of all, energy. And number two, it's difficult to walk and climb stairs like a human, and do it relatively functionally, and I guess, for lack of any better word, I guess not weird. So now let's take a look a little bit about how this could happen, and how it is that humans are able to walk, and why don't we have huge battery packs, and how do we get our energy? So let's just take a look at human gait. Last class, we talked about the ankle and hyperpronation, and how changes at the foot can result in other changes all the way up the chain. Hyperpronation is going to lead to other functional anatomy changes, such as internal tibial rotation and a knee bend, and how the gait cycle also has its expected functional anatomy relationships, and how too much angle or timing of pronation can disrupt all of those things. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about human gait. We're going to talk about the phases of human gait. We're going to talk a little bit more about the term escapement that we introduced when we talked about grandfather clocks a couple of weeks ago. And then we're going to talk about absorption and generation. Absorption you could think of as like storage of energy, and generation is the release of energy. And then what happens when the timing of this absorption and generation is disrupted, and somebody may have a movement or a walking disorder, or a disorder that affects their walking patterns. And somebody who has cerebral palsy, why do they develop the walking pattern they may have? And is it a normal or quote normal walking pattern? At the end of the day, hopefully you'll be able to describe structural issues related to hyperpronation. We talked about that in the last class, and I think that we'll try to move on from that today. But I'd like you to also be able to identify various stages of human walking, and talk about how energy can be conserved. Now, that energy conservation means how can potential and kinetic energy trade off of each other, so that that energy isn't lost, so that we don't need vast battery power or vast energy sources in order to walk. Then maybe what we can do is look at other physical machines or tools, and relate the term escapement to this whole walking pattern, and maybe explain or discuss how the brain might not necessarily be involved with every single step of walking. Because when I walk down the street, I'm very seldomly thinking about walking. Mostly I'm thinking about, my business, or I'm thinking about the lectures that I'm going to do, or the job that I have, every night. And I'm very seldomly thinking about walking upstairs or walking downstairs or anything. So how could it be that walking isn't such a brain-driven activity? So the other day we talked about the tibialis anterior. That's this muscle here. And what that muscle does is it's going to fire concentrically to dorsiflex the foot. It's also going to resist eversion. All right, so it fires concentrically to create dorsiflexion and inversion. So it's going to roll the foot in that direction. And eccentrically, it's going to resist plantar flexion and eversion. Now, what's hyperpronation? Hyperpronation is too much pronation. Now, pronation is when your foot rolls in this direction here, rolls in that direction. Now, what's going to roll the foot in that direction? Well, the ground reaction force It's going to hit laterally, at least it should, because most people, their feet hang in slight inversion. And that's going to create a torque, which is a force that's acting at a particular distance. And here's the line of action of that ground reaction force. And here's a distance here. So this ground reaction force acts at a particular distance away from the axis of rotation of the ankle joint. So this is the distance. And this distance and this force create a torque, and it's a torque here that is going to cause the foot to roll into pronation. So when that happens too much, all right, it means that not only is too much of an angle of pronation occurring, but the pronation is happening for too long a duration. So there's an angle or a magnitude here, but there's also a timing issue. And hyperpronation can lead to all sorts of different structural changes in the medial aspect of the foot. And it could also start to disrupt normal walking patterns. All right. When your leg is extending at toe off, it's supposed to cause external tibial rotation and supination. But if the foot is continuing to pronate, pronate causes internal tibial rotation. So pronation for too long is going to cause a whole change in terms of functional anatomy during the walking process. So what I want to do is take a little bit more, a little bit of a look into this whole walking pattern. Previously, we talked about an escapement. And remember, an escapement is some type of device in a clock or a watch or something that gives energy back when energy is lost. You see, here's a weight right here. There are these two weights. And here's a pendulum, and the pendulum swinging back and forth. And every once in a while, as the pendulum starts to dissipate and it starts to lose energy, one of these weights drops, and that potential energy release goes into the kinetic energy of this pendulum swinging. Now, grandfather clocks were really, expensive, and they were a luxury timepiece back in the day. And one of the difficulties was to get all of these big moving parts here into a small fitting so that people could actually wear them. That's why when you see movies, old movies, everybody used to have a pocket watch. Like rich people would have a pocket watch, right? Think about the technological advances that got all of these gears and all of these little escapements and all of these little pendulums, and they were able to get it from this size to a pocket watch, something that was really small. That's why those pocket watches were a sign of richness and wealth and opulence, because of that particular technological advance there. And then slowly but surely, instead of having to have gears and springs, they were able to find different minerals and different abilities to restore energy. So now these watches that we have, we take them for granted, but they were able to take all of this technology and put it into something that you can put on your wrist, which is pretty awesome. A clock is similar to pushing somebody on a swing, right? As this little girl goes this way, as she goes towards her father, all right, she's going to lose energy. She gets all the way to the end here. And then as she's at the apex of the swing, the father just has to put a little bit of energy back into the system, and then she's able to swing forward. She loses energy and swings backward. And then he pushes her forward. He doesn't have to carry her all the way to the front and pull her all the way back and all the way. He only has to do incremental energy. He only has to work every once in a while. He doesn't have to work all the time. He just has to work when he needs to work. And the timing of his push is critical. Like if she's coming back and she only gets halfway, and then he puts the timing, the push in, there's going to be a collision. She's got to wait all the way until she gets back here, and then he can push the energy into the system, and then she can go all the way forward. So the timing of when he pushes her on the swing is critical. And if you get the timing right, the energy that you have to put in can be relatively little. Right? So you can get somebody to, have fun on a swing for a long period of time. And pushing somebody on a swing doesn't really take a huge amount of your own energy. It's because this person is not pushing on the swing 100% of the time. They're pushing on the swing when they need to push on the swing. So we have another little situation here, like a walking pattern. And right now, this walking pattern is really efficient, but there may be things that are happening here that you might take, I guess, advantage of or not really consider. Now, when I'm walking, I'm never really thinking about walking, and we don't have huge battery packs. So there must be something that's happening a little bit like autonomously or without brain or without thought. And there must also be some semblance of stored or conserved energy. Right now, you'll notice that as this person's walking, this is right at the initial heel contact. All right, and right here, what's going to happen is the ground reaction force is going to push up on the heel. And here's the axis of rotation. And there's a distance away from that axis of rotation. And what that's going to cause is that's going to cause a plantar flexion in that direction. Now, that plantar flexion is going to be coupled with a change in length of this tibialis anterior muscle. This tibialis anterior muscle is going to stretch. So you'll also notice that here's at the initial contact, this foot actually has a little bit of potential energy. And remember, potential energy, let's go energy, and we'll call it potential. Potential is equal to mgh, the mass of the leg, times the acceleration due to gravity, times the height of the foot, so how far the foot is off the ground. So as the foot swings in this direction, there's a height. The foot is not on the ground, so there's a height, and it has potential energy. And as the energy starts to, as the foot goes closer and closer to the ground, the potential energy eventually goes closer to zero. But the kinetic energy, which is associated with velocity, kinetic energy, that equals 1/2 mv squared. And then there's another kind of potential energy. There's energy, and we'll call it just spring potential, is equal to 1/2 k x squared. So this is the energy that's kind of at play right now. At the top of the swing, where the foot is furthest away from the ground, it has as much potential energy. But at the end of the swing, the foot's not going to be moving because it's going to swing forward. And eventually it's going to go down. But at the top of the arc, there is as much potential energy, and kinetic energy is 0. And then as the foot starts to hit the ground, the foot is going to drop towards the ground, and it's going to reduce its potential energy, and eventually it's going to have a velocity to it, which is going to increase its kinetic energy. Then when the foot hits the ground and this whole plantar flexion happens, all right, there's another source of energy that starts to kick in, and it's this elastic potential energy here, and it says 1/2 kx squared. When we talked about the stress strain curves, K is the abbreviation for stiffness. So if the K increases, then the stiffness of this particular material increases. And X is the amount that the material, or the the distance, or sorry, I guess the displacement of the material. Actually, the better word is the strain in the material, right? So a stiff material here, one second. A stiff material that strains a lot will store a lot of energy in it. So what's happening is there's a conservation of energy. As the potential energy of the foot dropping to the ground reduces because the height is reducing, it immediately transfers over to kinetic energy, because as the foot falls towards the ground, it's picking up velocity and therefore kinetic energy. And then when the foot hits the ground and plantar flexion occurs, the spring potential, or the potential energy of this muscle, starts to change. So maybe there's very little energy lost at all. Maybe it's the kinetic energy is turning into, or the potential energy is turning into kinetic energy, which is turning into potential energy, which is turning into kinetic energy. And there's like a cycle here. Maybe I should even call it a recycling of energy here. And it's the recycling of energy that is the predominant source of energy during walking. And if that's the case, it's the stored, recycled energy that we are able to utilize during walking that is the source of energy. And indeed, that's what's happening. That's why we don't need to have a huge backpack for our battery. All right. And that's one of the reasons why right now we still don't see a huge number of robots everywhere, because we can't conserve the energy in the gears and the material that makes up that robot effectively as of yet. So what I want to do is I want to clear this drawings and show you a little bit about what's happening here. All right. So we have our ground reaction force. Sorry. We have our ground reaction force. That's going to act at the heel. That's going to cause your plantar flexion to occur. And that's going to cause your tibialis anterior muscle to store energy, because this muscle fires eccentrically to counteract, whoops, I'll just go like that, to counteract this plantar flexion. So as plantar flexion occurs, the tibialis anterior is lengthening and increasing its stored elastic potential energy. Then once this foot hits the ground, that energy is going to go somewhere. So once the foot makes contact with the ground, what is going to happen? Where is that energy going to go? Well, let's imagine I have, let's just draw it here. I think that'll be good enough. So right now we have this situation here. Ooh, let's change the color of that. So right now you have a situation here where your foot is now flat on the ground, and you have your tibialis anterior. Let's kind of talk about, because the tibialis anterior is acting like a spring right now. Let's say you have a spring like this. Now, if this spring is in stretch, all right, if this spring is stretched and storing energy, what's going to happen when that spring releases its energy? Well, it's either going to take this part of the foot and pull it upwards in this direction, or it's going to take this part of the foot, or the proximal attachment of that muscle, and it's going to pull it in this direction. And that's what happens. So what you'll notice right over here, man, if I could just change one thing about this Zoom thing, it would be this mouse situation. Right now, you'll see that the lower leg, the knee, the hip is on this side of the axis of rotation. What gets your leg to do this? Right now, the knee is over the ankle, right? Here's the axis of rotation. And now the knee is right above the axis of rotation. But here, the knee is behind the axis of rotation. What gets this part of the leg to come up and over the ankle? It's the release of this stored energy in the tibialis anterior. Plantar flexion stretches this muscle. And when that muscle releases that energy, all right, you also have like your spring, right? You have like this muscle is like a spring right here. And now the spring is really stretched here. And then the spring recoils and releases its energy. And it takes the knee, literally takes the knee and pulls the knee over the foot. So as soon as this ground reaction force happens, as soon as the heel hits the ground, it forces plantar flexion. That forces the tibialis anterior to fire eccentrically. Now, why does it fire eccentrically? Well, because if it doesn't fire eccentrically, then what happens is the foot slams into the ground. And if the foot slams into the ground 10,000 times a day, that's not going to be good for our forefoot structure, our arches, our ability to store energy. So, I mean, if this doesn't happen, then what will happen is our ability to walk will become compromised. If our ability to walk becomes compromised, we can't work, we can't get food, we can't do all sorts of other things that we need to do. So this happens automatically. Now, why we're walking, okay, that could be something that the brain is deciding. That could be the escapement. What the brain does is figures out why we need to walk. But then once we start walking, this plantar flexion, this stored eccentric energy in the tibialis anterior, this release of that stored energy to allow for the knee to swing up and over, that happens for free. That's all conservation of energy. All right, potential, changing into kinetic, changing into spring energy. And then what happens is that spring energy is now translated into potential energy because now you have a moving part of the body. Now, what's that going to do? Well, as the knee comes up and over, now you have your kneecap here, and that kneecap is swinging up and over in this direction. The stored energy of the tibialis anterior is released, but now what's going to happen with the gastroc? Now you have the gastroc, which is now going to start to stretch and store energy. Now, as your knee moves forward over the forefoot, there's going to be a stretching or a storing of potential energy at the gastroc. What is that going to do? Well, when I get finally into my terminal stance, my late phase of this walking pattern, let me see if I can. When I get to the final stages of my walking pattern, now I have a gastroc that is super stretched. And what is that going to do? Well, that's going to store elastic energy. And now my knee is going to stop when it gets here. So now my knee has potential energy because it's moving. All of that potential energy is changing into elastic stored energy. And eventually that stored energy is going to do something. And what it's going to do is it's going to release. And you'll notice that now the heel starts to come off the floor. All right, the heel starts to come off the floor. Well, what is that going to do? Well, interesting, because I have an axis of rotation right here. It's going to cause some type of rotation. And what's going to happen is this foot and the heel is going to rotate in that direction because of it. And because we have a double segmented pendulum here, we have an axis of rotation here and here, what it's going to cause is a knee bend. So now I have this axis of rotation here. The energy stored in my gastrosoleus unit has now been released. All right, it's now released. It's back into normal length. But what's happening now to the quads? Now I have my knee is bent, and as my knee goes from straight here and my heel raise forces my knee to bend, what it's going to do now to the quads is it's going to take these quads and it's going to stretch my quads eccentrically, storing energy here. All right, now because I have potential energy because my foot is off the ground, that potential energy is going to make my foot swing to here, but that potential energy is also working together with the release of this stored energy in my quads. My quads are going to go from stretch. There's going to be a slight contraction at the quads, and that's going to allow for my lower leg to swing forward. All right, that's going to put my lower leg in this situation here. And now, because there's height here, now I have potential energy again. So there's potential energy that's associated with height. There's energy here associated with kinetic energy or velocity. All right, velocity, kinetic energy. And then there's spring energy, energy associated with the lengthening of a material and the storage of passive spring energy. All of this stuff is happening for free. I've never ever thought about my quad and what my quad is supposed to do as I'm walking. In fact, if you take a look at EMG or electromyography or the signal of energy or electricity coming from the muscles, the quad isn't firing this whole entire time. The quad only fires here. Just like the guy pushing the little girl in the swing. He doesn't have to push her forward, all the way forward, all the way forward, all the way forward, and then stop and then pull her all the way back and pull her all the way back. He only has to push her at one particular time. All of these muscles don't have to work all the time. They have to work when they're supposed to work. But this is a pretty fascinating storage and release of energy. And this is something that is not unique, but very efficient for human beings and bipedal walking. This translation of one energy to the next energy. And they still haven't figured out how to make it happen effectively enough in robots so that the energy is stored and not lost in the gears. And that's why Asimo has to have such a huge battery, because biological tissues are able to do this pretty astoundingly. That's pretty awesome. So let's take a look at one other slide, I believe. All right. And let's clear all these drawings, although that was fun. Let's go to the next slide. So here you have a pretty clear heel strike. That's going to cause plantar flexion and storing energy of your Achilles tendon, of your tibialis anterior. That's going to force your lower leg up and over your ankle. That's going to store energy in your gastrosoleus unit. That's going to cause your heel to come up. That's going to cause your knee to bend and a stored energy in your quadricep. What happens if this is disrupted? What happens if, because your shoes are worn? What happens if your muscles don't have the ability to eccentrically contract? What happens if I haven't run for a while, and I'm expecting on my first day out running during the spring, I'm expecting for all of this muscle timing to occur. Probably it's not going to be such an effective transfer of energy. All right. So this just says at initial contact, the heel strikes the ground. The ground reaction force forces the foot into eversion and plantar flexion, and then the tibialis anterior absorbs this force, stores energy like a spring. All right, and then what happens is the ground reaction force causes the knee to bend. As the foot comes up and over the ankle, the quadriceps fire eccentrically and store energy. All right, and then that releases and allows the lower leg to swing over the axis of rotation. Actually, these two should be opposite. The stretched tibialis anterior releases energy should be above, but it's okay. I think that we've done a good job explaining that. So here, if you take a look, this is biceps femoris. This is your semimembranosus, and now this is an adult control. All right, let's just take a look at the biceps femoris. All right, this is for somebody who has cerebral palsy, and this is for somebody who does not have cerebral palsy. All right, so this is a normal walking stance here. And you'll notice that the biceps femoris is not firing. All right. It doesn't fire all the way through the stance phase. And right at the beginning of the swing phase, the biceps femoris kicks in, provides a little bit of energy, and then shuts off for the rest of the entire walking stage until it gets to about the swing phase again. And then the biceps femoris kicks in again and shuts off again. So right here, the biceps femoris is not firing, even though you're walking and moving your leg. All right, even though you're moving your leg, the muscles of your legs are not firing 100% of the time. Here's your gluteus medius. As you hit your heel and your body is rising up and over your ankle, you can see that your gluteus medius is pulling, firing concentrically to help pull the body up and over the axis of rotation, which is the foot. Whoops. And then what happens is you can see that the energy of the gluteus medius stops here. And during the swing phase, as your quadricep is firing, your gluteus medius shuts off. All right, and then as your foot gets to the end of the swing phase, so that the foot doesn't continue lifting all the way above your head, the gluteus medius fires eccentrically to slow it down. Then your heel hits the ground and your gluteus medius fires more intensely to help pull your body up and over your ankle. But again, the gluteus medius isn't firing 100% of the time. It only fires when it needs to fire. And the time it doesn't need to fire, it shuts off. Man, that sounds like an escapement. That sounds like pushing somebody on a swing. My biceps femoris doesn't have to fire 100% of the time. It fires when it needs to. It fires when it needs to put the energy into the system at the right time. That's awesome. Now, instead of the brain having to do everything all at once, or the muscles having to do everything all at the same time, it seems as though there's a built-in escapement here. It no longer is doing everything all at once. It's doing when it needs to do it. If you look at somebody who has cerebral palsy up here, all right, you can see there's a completely different pattern. The gluteus medius for this individual is firing 100% of the time, but at no time is it firing with enough intensity to really do anything. All right, and same thing, your biceps femoris is firing at the complete wrong time. So for somebody who has cerebral palsy, the timing of this escapement is severely disrupted. So one really beautiful thing about walking is that there's a huge amount of conserved energy and also a huge amount of the walking pattern that is governed by physics, torque, the fact that you have a heel which creates a moment arm so that the foot can plantar flex, the fact that when muscles elongate and fire eccentrically, they store energy, the fact that we have gravity so that when the foot rises at the end of the swing stance and before heel strike, it can drop. And gravity has something to do with our conservation of energy. When you think about walking, walking is an incredibly complex pattern that utilizes energy, physics, and I don't even think about any of it. It seems to be something that kind of happens on its own, and that's the beauty of it. That's why you can walk and chew gum. That's why you can walk up a set of stairs without having to do all of these complex processing. And that's why it seems to be right now that in order to get robots commonplace, in order to make it so that they can have enough energy on, I guess, on their body, on the robot's body, all right, they're going to have to still create tissues and understand these walking dynamics such that the robot walking can conserve energy and doesn't have to be so computational. Does anybody have any questions about what we discussed today? Take a look at your shoes. What are the impacts of shoes or of detraining or of, you know, not having correct musculature? You know, none of that is necessarily overuse, because if you overuse and you do hyper marathons, but you have the right eccentric capability and you don't have fallen arches, well, I mean, could be the case it's not going to be a problem. But if you don't have the eccentric capability in your muscles to store energy or to slow your foot flop from happening, or you do have hyperpronation so that your internal tibial rotation is happening at the same time as it's supposed to be externally rotating, well, now you have mechanisms for injury. So just have fun over the next couple of days, taking a look at people and walking, and watch how they walk and watch their shoes, and you'll get maybe a different appreciation of kinesiology. And now if I go to Faneuil Hall or I go to the Red Sox game and I people watch, I very seldomly will look at, you know, what they're wearing and the superficiality of the observation. I'll start looking more at a kinesiological, from a kinesiological perspective, and it's far more interesting sometimes. All right, does anybody have any questions about what we went over?
No.
All right, well, I'll log in on Wednesday, and we'll talk a little bit more about CP Gate and stuff like that. But if you got to travel and be with your family, I totally understand. All right. All the best, guys. Have a good day.
Thank you, Professor.
Okay.